Hi everyone, and welcome to week 4 of Great Writers of English Literature. This week we have a very tough subject. We're going to be asking about why English literature is so white and what we can do to pay attention and hear more from voices of color when we study English literature. I hope you enjoy. Even though writers of color have become an important part of the English literary tradition in the present day, including writers like Andrea Levy, whose work we'll be reading later this semester, and even though writers of color coming from the former British colonies or imperial holdings of England have always been an important part of English literature, when people talk about traditional English literature, the literary canon, what they typically mean are the white writers like Charlotte Bronte, Charles Dickens, and George Orwell, who are heavily featured on college syllabi focusing on English literature. One of the reasons this nearly exclusive focus on white writers is so strange is that the history and reach of England as a global political empire meant that its holdings, its dominion, its empire included people all over the world of different races coming from different cultures with different appearance. England was also a key player in the international transatlantic slave trade, and even after it abolished slavery around the beginning of the 19th century, it continued to support slavery through its demand for products like cotton and rum and sugar, which were major exports that depended on slave labor in the Caribbean and the Americas. Among other things, this history means that non-white people were an essential part of the everyday life in England for many centuries up to the present day. And yet, rather than seeing representations of these people in novels or hearing their voices as writers, instead, the English literary canon tends to represent people of color in offensive stereotypes, representing Caribbean people, Africans, Asian people, and Jews in the worst possible light, as subhuman, certainly less than English. Taking a cue from activist artists like Titus Kaphar and scholars like Gretchen Gersina, this week we're asking a question about who gets silenced, erased, or left out of traditional English literary history. Returning for a moment to the poem Ozymandias, I'd like to invite you all to look at this passage. Rather than thinking about the great king or pharaoh Ozymandias, who's the subject of the sculpture, this passage invites us to think about the invisible presence of the sculptor who made an image that still conveys the cruelty and tyranny of the person being depicted. In this passage, the poet writes, "Near them on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed." So what this means is that the sculptor, the person who made this work of art, could see that the king or the pharaoh was cruel, well those passions read, and that his hand, the hand that makes the sculpture, is mocking those qualities in the leader. The sculptor and the poet both draw attention to the wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command that are part of the cruel authority of the pharaoh. So even now, when the Sculpture itself is ruined and forgotten there as the lone and level sands stretch far away. The opinion of the invisible person who created that sculpture, that opinion is still very much present. Bearing in mind the lesson of this sculptor and the invisible existence of so many people of color in England's past, I'd like you to write this week about how Mary Seacole's writing teaches us about the experience of people of color in 19th century England.